Hey horror TV fans, I am bored now. Today I'm going to be talking about Them, The Scare, episodes 1 and 2, so full spoilers from the start of this review. So episode 1 is called Are You Scared? And episode 2 is called The Devil Himself Visited This Place. Full spoilers as always. So this is the long-awaited series 2 of this anthology series, where each season is set in a different time period. You have a different set of characters and a different setting. I covered some of series 1 on the channel, about half of it, when it came out in 2020, so you can go and check out those reviews. And I really enjoyed the first series, actually. Pretty intense stuff overall, but really well done. This season has a couple of notable guest stars, including Wayne Knight, Newman himself.
Kramer! Hello, boys. Oh! Hello, Newman. Are you looking for someone?
He plays the chief of police, who our lead character of Dawn has to answer to. And also in a supporting role, you've got the legendary Pam Grier.
That's the idea. The rest of your boyfriend is still around. And I hope you two live a long time. And then maybe you get to feel what I feel. Death is too easy for you, bitch.
The setup is that the series it starts in the late 80s, goes into the early 90s. You have this all-black African-American female detective, Dawn, who has some murky history with the police and her family, and they suffered from police brutality. So she's really put in the spotlight as like the lead detective on this murder investigation, a case of a mysterious death at like a foster home where the lady of the house was killed, and the lead suspect is one of the teenagers who happens to be black and has a history with drugs. And a lot of fingers are pointed at him, even though there seems to be evidence that suggests that's not clear cut and that there's some sort of weird ritual connected to it. So there's pressure on her just to solve the case, and this happens around the time of the Rodney King incident. So the resources are extra stretched, and as I said, Newman, who plays her boss, is putting pressure on her to like wrap the case up and not make too much of a fuss of it, even though she suspects there's something suspicious afoot. And you get into a lot of the politics of the era and the tension that's on Dawn as you follow her life, her son at home. She's a single mother, and also there's a little bit because she does take the case home, like she takes it very seriously and personally, to the extent that you see her take the recordings home. In fact, the first episode ends with her listening to like the recordings. I think it's of this case, it might be of a past case, and that's when she hears something demonic on the end of the tape recorder in that scene. So you get a classic sort of like detective mystery setup, and you've got all the politics of that era, as I said, and some of the tensions that's put on her. She's got a very aggressive, like borderline racist partner, Ronald, who is ready to just pin it on the black teenager without really putting that much thought into it. But that's the sense, then at the very least it's like casual racism, because they're determined just to take the easy like victory and get the case wrapped up. At the same time, there's another storyline that's happening parallel to that, and that is of this character who works, Edmund his name is, he works in like an amusement arcade, and he's seen as a little bit of like the butt of the jokes, but he's also like an ambitious like jobbing actor trying to get his big break. We see him go to auditions, and in the first episode there's a very effective scene where he goes to audition for like this role in a movie, and we see that in the lobby there's a bunch of black actors hoping to get the part as well. And that's once again important because it's a stereotypical black type role where it's like a street thug essentially. So when Edmund goes in to audition for the role, like the casting director or the producer, whoever it is encouraging him to act as like black and thug-like as he can, and because he wants to be a serious actor and he doesn't want to be like typecast in those roles, he doesn't want to perpetrate the stereotype, then he's not into that. Like, he doesn't want to do that. He strikes up a bit of a bond with the receptionist Rhonda and takes a shine into her. I think you can definitely tell there's an attraction, at least on his part, even if it's not on her part. But she does feel sorry for him because she sees the situation he's in. She's a single parent as well, and Pam Grier plays her mother. And she tries to help him out, so that's like an ongoing thing. She tries to get him roles, and I'll talk about what happens in episode 2 with him because that's sort of progressive. But yeah, there's some uneasy tension in his storyline as well, and the way he is kind of berated. But that storyline really goes places in episode 2, which I'll get to. So just to sum up some of my thoughts on the opening 2 episodes, I think it's a solid start. Like, I definitely like the style and the mood of it. Once again, it really captures like the period and the setting. It just has a certain like sheen to it. Like, it has a very 70s or 80s feeling sheen, and a lot of it does seem to be like shot on film. It probably isn't, but it just feels like that, and you just get a sense of a very moody, nihilistic sort of big city setting. And once again, you have this kind of offbeat weird style and some off-kilter like supernatural things going on in the side of it, which seems to impact on the plot and everything, and you're not quite sure how to take some of this stuff. You're not quite sure if it's in people's heads or if there's more to it than that. But once again, the psychology is all there, and it's very effective. I think if I have a couple of complaints, just small ones really, the first one is then there are a couple of scenes, I think particularly in episode 1, that do feel a little bit hokey, like they're bordering on that. Some of the stuff with Edmund in episode 1, where he's just kind of playing with these strange like toy dolls, and it's meant to be part of this ritual, but we're not quite sure exactly what it has to do with anything just yet. Some of that stuff was bordering on being a little bit hokey. Also, like the first series, it does have a very heightened feel at times, and it's a serious show, obviously, and it makes some very serious points. It's very blunt about the racial politics and summing up the era, and I think all that stuff is done very well, and it balances it out with like the supernatural, weirder sort of metaphors too. But there's just some scenes that are very in your face and very, not exactly hammy, but like they maybe feel a bit too frantic. But there's a scene in episode 2 where Dawn is pursuing this murder suspect through like an alleyway, and there's a lot of stuff going on in that scene. It's very intense, it's very well shot, the scene, but just certain stuff in that scene maybe could have been dialed down. But really those are the only 2 complaints. So we get a decent setup to Dawn in episode 1, and we see that it's going to be a long process of her maybe being taken seriously and getting to grips with the case. She talks to one of the survivors from the foster home, like this young vulnerable girl at one point. Hears that the girl also has a bit of like a haunted like past, and that there's been weird events in her past, and she starts getting ideas that there could be more to this from those encounters. I actually think Edmund's plot is a bit more interesting interesting, in episode 1, because, as I said, that audition scene when he goes, it is so cringe and so like effective, and it's just shot so brilliantly, like him walking through the lobby all dejected, and you got these other like really working class black people trying to make it in this very competitive, being brought in to like play up to their stereotypes. And I think that's a lot of what this show does, is it's all about playing up to stereotypes and like almost playing on like, because I think in this case, when you have certain characters like the drug dealer, as I said, I think in many ways he's playing up to what is expected to him. But the feeling of this series is very much it's putting in context why sometimes people like that are forced into a corner. But it works well with the metaphor of the show. Like, then there might be supernatural stuff, but certain characters, because of what's happening with Rodney King, because of what's happening with the police's response to Rodney King, and just the sneering of like the African American community, it sort of gets across that paranoia very well. But yeah, the stuff at the audition in episode 1 was maybe the highlight of what was a solid episode. But probably even more intense is when Edmund goes into the lobby and starts talking to Rhonda, because like she's being nice to him, and like they're talking about her kid, and later on we see when they go to Cade, and we see that Edmund is really good with the kid, and I think partly, as I said, he has taken a shine into Rhonda romantically, but Rhonda is putting it out there that she knows what he's going through, and it's tough being someone of colour trying to make it in this business. So she says she will look out for him. She will try and get him some roles. And he appreciates that. And I think there's just an awkward pause in that scene, because you can tell that he wants to ask Rhonda out. And like, it's almost like he just lingers a bit too long before leaving and like just saying goodbye. But there's a bit of a vibe between them. Again, I'm not quite sure if she likes him in that way, but definitely he seems to be into her that way, because he does live quite an isolated existence. And then we see him leave the office, and I think what's even more kind of unsettling and cringe is like he then waits in his car, and he just waits there all night. And I think some of this is just out of boredom, but he literally waits for her to leave the office. And we see him watching her in her car. And I think in his car. And I think this is a good setup to the fact that this character could go either way. Like, Edmund's character is constantly on the edge, and he could be someone who goes down a more positive like path, or he could be someone who like really becomes self-destructive, really becomes almost like a villain in many ways, and certainly comes off as a little bit creepy in that sequence. But just building on that a little bit in episode 2, because Rhonda does contact him, she keeps her promise, and she actually gets him a role in a horror movie, like a slasher. And this is the era of the slashers, of course. But the role is as the killer, which is something fresh, really, at the time, to have like a black main killer in a horror movie. As she says, brothers very rarely get these roles, if at all. And at first he's not too sure, but there's a bit of playful banter where it's like she says something like, I feel I can trust you, I feel you're nice. And there's just a gag about, oh, you would think so. He accepts the role, and this show does bounce between like black humour and like tense drama quite a bit. So one of those scenes is when he's in his bedroom later, And I should also point out he's on the verge of killing himself, like before she phones, because he's constantly got this paper bag on his head. But anyway, there's a funny scene later when he's in his bedroom and he's just play acting all these different like characters, and the idea is that they're like white characters that he's dreaming of being. And one of them, which gave me a chuckle, is Hulk Hogan. Like he is like the black sort of version of Hulk Hogan, and that works really well because it's this idea almost that a lot of times you wouldn't see like the true American hero, like that kind of persona that Hulk Hogan did in wrestling for years. You wouldn't see him. He's unlikely to be portrayed as like a black man or by a black man. So I did enjoy that, him like daydreaming of taking over all these right roles, and it builds to quite the end of the episode because he puts on this like pig costume, which is like this sort of, I'm not sure if it's meant to be what he's going to be dressed up as in the horror movie, or it might just be what he wears to work sometimes, because as I said, he is sometimes, the butt of the jokes, but he goes to work in the pig costume, but he's also got a knife, so he shows up like that, and he is scaring the shit out of everyone for obvious reasons, and his boss fires him and says, "I'm calling the police." And he takes the hood off and looks around, and he just looks all kind of in a daze and out of it. So almost like maybe he's being controlled by something. But then there's a perverse smile on his face when he looks around and sees how scared everyone is. So it's this idea that, yeah, hey, I'm part of it now. I get to scare people. It's almost like this empowerment, but this perverse empowerment. And there's a great use of Guns N' Roses' Welcome to the Jungle over the credits of that episode. So that's a fun little bit of commentary as well, like going on. It's like almost be careful what you wish for sort of thing. But that was a great musical moment. And there's some weird things going on with him, like during the two episodes, because he is playing with like these toys and seems to be doing some kind of ritual, although it's not quite made clear what he's doing exactly and if he's in control of what he's doing. But also it seems to be having some weird effect on Rhonda and her family in their home. I have to mention the Jason Takes Manhattan reference in that episode, because at one point he's got the TV on and it's like an Assyrio Hall, and Assyrio Hall has Jason Voorhees on, and it's gone into the early 90s now, so it's gone roughly to when Jason Takes Manhattan is coming out. So that's kind of the interview. It's like, I think it would be Kane Hodder at that point, but Kane Hodder in character on the talk show. And he's watching this, so this again feeds into a little bit of he's being inspired. Maybe he wants to be like these great iconic horror villains. So that's all pretty good. I didn't expect a Jason Takes Manhattan reference in this show. So switching sort of to the other plot, and really episode 2, because at one point, so there's some good atmosphere and some good tension, as I said, with the fallout to Rodney King and that whole incident, and Dawn having to explain that to her son. We also see a bit like why she's a police officer. We also see a bit of like the autopsy for the death, and how there seems to be inconsistencies, and how Ronald, the racist partner, is just determined to like just pin it on like the black drug dealer, and just says how it points to that. But then also then there seems to be ambiguity over the death. It seems to be then it was quite a slow, painful death. But then Dawn's wondering why no one heard her when there was like all these kids in the house, and Ronald seems to think that maybe the body was moved at some point, but that's a little bit up in the air as well. So lots of question marks. And then quite deep into the episode, there's a second killing. And this one is really a shocking scene because we follow the drug dealer who like is under suspicion. And Dawn has started to notice then there's a pattern here where these two, like the first victim and then this victim, I forget the character's name actually now, but Curtis, I think. Yeah, Curtis. There's a pattern where they both seem to be under some sort of a spell, some trance, and they both appear to see things during the day, like they come to them, and it's in the run up to like the killing. Because it's Curtis who Dawn traces after, because she sees him around the crime scene and thinks he might be involved somehow, and you get that extended sequence, and we see more of kind of what Ronald's like brand of policing is when it comes to this sort of thing in that scene as well, where he goes way over the top. And there's also the baby present, because that's what Curtis says, is that he was in a rush to try and get back to his son. And then we cut to him later at night. We see that he does make drugs, because that's another thing which Ronald is stereotyping him with, and trying to link the two, where she says, well, we know that the previous victim was probably into drugs. This guy, well, actually at that point he doesn't know that he makes drugs, but he's like speculating and trying to draw a parallel. But anyway, there's this whole scene at night, and it's in the backdrop to the Rodney King stuff, and he's got the police randomly show up and they're banging on the door and it's really loud. But then it turns out they're not there when he goes to the door, and we just see his paranoia increase. And this is partly, I think, what they're doing, because it's this idea of paranoia and just driving you to your basic animal like instincts almost. And the baby is screaming and crying, and he goes into the other room. And at first I thought he'd actually killed the baby, but it turns out he killed himself, but sort of forced the baby to watch. And then he was taped up in a similar way to the other victim, the previous victims. So this really makes Dawn believe that there's some sort of connection and that there's a copycat. And you've got the Wayne Knight character who, like, he's not a total jerk. He just keeps pushing this line about how, like, the resources are spread really thin because of the public's reaction to Rodney King. But I think he's a little bit more open to what Dawn is saying, but ultimately he tells her to go with what Ronald thinks, and Ronald is, as I said, just using this stuff and jumping to the most easy conclusions, because there's sort of a joke in in the first episode about how he doesn't really like to do like complex paperwork, how he just likes to draw the easy conclusions, like. So yeah, that's the whole thing. But things do progress a little bit where Dawn is starting to open up ideas and starting to see new angles to explore. And another thing Ronald says is he says, my first girlfriend was black, pretty much when Dawn accuses him of like racism. So it's that liberal race sort of thing. So yeah, that's pretty much the first two episodes. Bit of a rambling review, but I hope you enjoyed my thoughts. And I'll try and do 2 episodes at a time, because it's a new series which has come out in the past week. All episodes are up, so I think that's probably a good way to do it. I'll try and stay on top of it anyway. But yeah, this has been my thoughts on them, the first 2 episodes of Series 2. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe, as always. Support me on patreon.com/borednow for as little as $1 a month for some extra perks. And I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.